Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Julius Sokenu. I have the honor and the pleasure to serve as the president here at Moorpark College. Welcome to Moorpark College for those of you who are here for the first time. And for those of us joining us from home or some other place on the interwebs, as the people say, we appreciate you being here this evening. Moorpark College is very proud of the partnership that we have with the Colleges of Law. Both institutions are really about developing a sense of not only of civic engagement, but developing a culture of civic discourse that then enriches our community, discourse that then enriches our own learning about ourselves, and ultimately part of our mission is to convene these kinds of conversations that not only support our community, but that help us as a community to engage with one another in positive ways. So I welcome you to Moorpark College. I know that this is not the first partnership we've had with Colleges of Law, and we continue to build this relationship because we know that it is best for our county. So I'm going to introduce you now the president of the Colleges of Law, Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Sokenu. And welcome all of you to Debate Night, here in a partnership between Moorpark College and the Colleges of Law. The Colleges of Law, for those of you at home and here that don't know, we were founded in 1969 as your community law school. We started here in Ventura County, and then 5 years later, in 1974, opened a campus in Santa Barbara County, and have been delivering legal education ever since, with a focus on access and opportunity and affordability. If you're interested in learning more about the College of Law, I invite you to go to our website and check us out there. And as Julia said, we've been a great partner with Moorpark for a number of years now. We did a program here with Moorpark earlier this spring, and we've been doing these debates now for 8 years. We started up in Santa Barbara. We had debates on ballot propositions up then. If you remember, there was one on capital punishment back in 2016. We did a program on that. Did a program on gun control. Came back actually 2 years later, did one on rent control in 2018. You all remember when that was on the ballot. And during COVID, we ran a number of debates. It was all on Zoom. And we did affirmative action and some of the other programs back then. Actually, some of those are still on our YouTube page if you're interested in checking those out. So we have our audience with us tonight here in person. We also have our audience at home. And of course, this is going to be recorded. Let's get it underway. Let's get it started. And with that, we have a very special moderator with us tonight. If you've been to any of the League of Women Voter programs across the Ventura County, you know David Marin. He's been involved with the League of Women Voters for a number of years. He's been doing forums with them. He also is involved with the Ventura County Civic Alliance, who has a terrific program actually coming up next week on AI issues. And go to the Ventura County Civic Alliance website to learn more about that program. With that, let's bring them up with a warm round of applause from our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, David Marin.
And the first announcement is the poll hasn't come up quite yet. We're going to bring it up here in just about 30 seconds. If you're not able to get to it, stand by and we'll bring that up. While we're waiting for that, I'm just going to give each of you about 15 seconds. If you'd like to introduce yourself, we'll start with Maria Navarro. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Maria Navarro. I am here as a senior policy advocate for the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, otherwise known as CAUSE. We're a nonprofit organization that works in Ventura, Oxnard, and Santa Paula in Ventura County. We work with farm workers, with tenants, and I work with tenants every day, so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, and our next panelist is Jared Barton.
Hello, my name is Jared Barton. I'm a professor of economics at California State University Channel Islands. And a weird coincidence, Maria here is the twin sister of one of my former students, which I could not have possibly anticipated after teaching in this community for 12 years. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I might just have her brother come up here and do this for me.
And while they're bringing up the poll, a little bit about how this works. So Maria is representing the for Prop 33. So she will be going first in a little bit. She'll have a minute and a half. We have a countdown timer up front, so they'll be keeping right on time. Jared is opposing Prop 33, and he'll go second. We'll then take questions from the audience. We'll give each person a chance to respond to those questions. And then by about 11 p.m. tonight, we'll wrap up, I think. Is that we're not going to go that long. So,
Give our microphone.
all right, and do we have a poll up? Are we still working on the poll?
This microphone does not work.
Go ahead.
I think that's
we'll
a
just
bad
share.
idea.
Yeah, we're just going to share. It's a college, so you have to have some education here about how the microphones work.
Can we leave that alone?
All right. Go ahead and, okay, the poll is open. I can announce the poll's open. And while you're doing that, you're probably wondering, David, is there going to be fact checking tonight? And I'm going to tell you, maybe. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. First fact check, I'll tell you, it's definite we landed on the moon. So we'll go with that as the first fact check.
Well, that blows my argument.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, the Earth is also
All right. Are we good to go here, poll-wise? Everybody have a chance?
We're going to close the poll.
Has everybody had a chance to vote who's in here? Okay, sounds good. This is we're gonna pick up the pace because we're gonna also offer our panelists rebuttal time. So this will go a little faster as we get going. So with that, Maria, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and start with your opening statement. You have 1:30 when you're ready.
Sure, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today here and online. And thanks to Moorpark College and the Colleges of Law for hosting this debate. Before we start, I would like to say that I am especially delighted here to be with Jared, who was my brother's economic teacher, professor at CSUCI, and so I've heard a lot of good things about him. Let's see how we do in debate. But again, I'm a senior policy advocate for this nonprofit called Cause. We organize Spanish-speaking immigrant communities across Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. Specifically, Ventura County, we work in Santa Paula, Ventura, and Oxnard. We focus on housing, environmental, and labor justice, and most of these community members that we work with are tenants. Since 2018, we've advocated for local rent stabilization and eviction protection ordinances, and we have been successful in passing these ordinances in both the city of Santa Barbara and Oxnard. I'm lucky to have the opportunity to work closely with these tenants every single day, and of course, I'm taking the position in favor of Prop 33, a proposition that would repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. And I'm guessing we'll be talking a lot about rental housing and the rental market in a very abstract manner. So what I want to say right now is that I would like to keep in mind, right, that we're talking about families. We're talking about people who are in the center of our communities.
I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
Okay, and our next. I run a tight ship, Jared. Okay, our next speaker is Jared.
I've worked with David before, and clearly I haven't gotten used to it. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to the Colleges of Law. Thank you, President, for hosting us. It's very kind of you. I'm really delighted to be here with Maria today and to talk with you all about this. There's this great quotation from this economist. He's a Swedish economist. He was on the Nobel Prize Committee before he died. His name is Assar Lindbeck, and he was asked one time about rent control, and he said, and I'm going to butcher his accent, "I know of no better way to destroy a city's housing stock than rent control, other than aerial bombardment." And that is how I feel about this. Maria raised a really good point, that we should be thinking about the families who are affected by this. And that is exactly right. We should. So we have to ask who those families are and in what way they are affected. So it turns out there's a really great paper that came out just this year in the Journal of Housing Economics that reviews the rent control literature for the last 60 years. And we'll get a chance to dig into that later. But one of the main things that it finds is that while it will lower rents on the things you control, it will raise rents elsewhere, lower supply, lower housing quality, and overall harm the families that it's trying to help. And that is why I'm advocating that we not repeal Costa-Hawkins. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the audience, a reminder, just raise your hand and we'll bring you a card if you want to ask one of the questions. going to start off with this one. Jared, you're up first. So rents are high. I doubt there's much argument about that in the area. It's particularly high for newer construction. The Prop 33, all it does is give controls back to the cities. So what's so bad about letting the cities make their decisions about rent control? Costa, the current law does not allow cities and counties to put in rent control with certain exceptions. But this new law repeals that and allows cities and counties. So what's so bad about that?
So giving cities and counties the ability to use rent control, which is an incredibly popular yet misguided law, is kind of like allowing my children to get their hands on my firearms. There might be some limited set of the state of the world where that would be beneficial, but most of the time it would be destructive because the device itself is destructive. So rent control has a really simple set of things that it will cause. The immediate effect is that the people who are in whatever units you decide to control the rent on will pay lower rent. That is the first order we say effect, the initial effect. But the thing it will do is create a situation in which more people want to get those houses because they know they are artificially cheap. We call this a shortage. Those people will then bid up the prices of other houses that aren't controlled. If you control all of them in a community, then all that happens is that you'll have an even larger shortage. At the same time, you're going to have landlords have less of an incentive to keep up the housing because the real value to them of that asset has declined. So you will gradually degrade the housing stock. So to go to your question is, here's a thing that we know on net is bad. Why we would let people pick the bad thing, which again does not just fall upon themselves, but on others, is beyond me.
Thank you. Maria, let's hear your thoughts. Costa
Thank
Hawkins
you.
really eliminated cities having control. This would give it back to cities. What's so good or bad about that?
Yeah, well, I think each city in Ventura County is different. And so we want to get back to local control really when it comes to rent stabilization laws. So we, as I said before, we have rent control in both Oxnard and Ojai, and Thousand Oaks has actually an older rent stabilization rent control law that was passed back in the 1980s. What it would do, so I work with tenants every single day. I have seen in the last, not even kidding you guys, 6 months, I have seen 3 elderly women have $1,000+ rent increases in 30 days. Why? Because these women have been living in the house that they're renting for more than 10, 20, 30 years. The one that has been living there the longest has been there for 30+ years. They paid off the mortgage of that house. When their landlord dies, they had a good amicable relationship with the landlord. When the landlord dies, then it gives the state basically the right to increase the rent for more than $1,000, $2,000 a month. These women, all 3 of them, were facing homelessness. And it is true that our senior population, those that are 65+, are the ones at risk of facing homelessness right now in California. I understand that there is this economic argument, but I just don't believe that that's how it rolls out. It doesn't roll out instantly, right? If you take away Costa Hawkins, you still have to legislate inside the cities. And what would happen is that Oxnard and Ojai would get housing in single-family homes and condos to have rent stabilization.
Keep an eye on the timer, please. So Maria, we'll start with you on the next question. So one of the arguments against Prop 33 is that because there's rent control, developers will not go and build new apartment complexes, not want to do things where they're afraid they won't be able to get a good return on their investment and ultimately be able to raise rents. So how do you respond to this argument that there'll be a shortage of housing because developers won't want to build?
Right. You see, that is a very economic argument. That's theoretical. As in, yes, if we have a price ceiling or something, right, then it would technically do that. But that's not where we are right now. That's not how the law actually happens. You still have to legislate. You still have to pass these laws through the city government and the county government. In Ventura County, I wish I could say, I wish we could say we were a lot more progressive, but there's no city here that would do vacancy control, which is where that problem lies, right? So I believe that there is actually this, the reality is that it's not gonna do that, right? We still have to legislate, we still have to make it go through the court system if we pass it, right? What I'm trying to say is we've had Costa-Hawkins since 1995. I was 1 year old, okay? And my brother and I and all the young folks here are the ones who are feeling the effects of Costa-Hawkins. It has not lived up to its promise. We have not seen a great supply of housing coming up. I honestly believe that zoning laws are actually more guilty of creating this fake, the supply problem that we have, right? And so I think in general, what we have right now is a rent control legislation that's not gonna play out in that way.
Thank you. Jared, what do you say about this argument that 33 will reduce the willingness of developers to build housing?
So the short answer is yes, that's correct. But I want to go back to something that Maria said, because Maria has in fact made the most correct statement of the evening that we could have. It's a statement that has been made by the Legislative Analyst's Office repeatedly, by basically any economist that you ask. It is found overwhelmingly in the empirical studies of the effects of price controls and of prices of housing, which is that the real issue is the restriction of supply through land use regulation. That is the primary reason that housing is expensive. Now we can ask, so then what happens if you have that and you don't remove it and you add on a layer of price controls? And Maria is correct, you still have to pass those price controls. I prefer that simply not be an option. Earlier, David asked us, why shouldn't we return this to the local decision makers? Well, the most local decision making is between a tenant and their landlord. The bilateral negotiation there over the price of a house and its condition. That is where I would like to keep that decision, because in that location is where the people who have the incentive to get the answer right are also the people making the decision. So yeah, it would probably restrict housing supply, but as Maria correctly pointed out, the bigger restriction is already before us with land use regulation.
Thank you. Jared, to your point, you're up first on this next one, unless you want to rebut.
I do rebut a little bit.
No, and I agree.
Rebuttals, you'll have 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And I would say that, yes, land use. I would say though, when you talk about kind of like the individual decision that a landlord has with their tenant, you're thinking about somebody who, one, is able to read and write, is literate, to someone who maybe speaks English. That's just not the case. The case that I have seen frequently in Oxnard is that we have our farm workers, our backbone for this community, being the people who are being taken advantage of. And they are not even Spanish speakers. They are Mixteco speakers. They do not read and write.
And do you wish to?
No, let's keep
Okay, let's keep moving. So, Jared, to the point that you just made, we have a question here. So, yes, it sounds like academically that a restriction on housing means that it's a bad thing. But many people would argue here in Ventura County that there's just not enough housing. We have about 3% vacancy rate in apartments across the county. So landlords are clearly in the driver's seat. So shouldn't there be some type of rent control to keep, to allow people who are in their homes to stay?
Well, first of all, to say that vacancy is 3% does not mean that landlords are in the driver's seat. There are two blades to the scissors of supply and demand. The reason that the prices are high is that we have repeatedly voted, both in individual cities in our community and in the county as a whole, to restrict the use of land to keep it out of housing. That is the primary, secondary, and tertiary cause of high housing prices in Ventura County. Period. If you then put rent control on that, all you are doing is preventing the housing from going to whoever happens to value it most, which then causes the misallocation of housing. For example, a family at one point in time that happens to be living in the house, they have rent stabilized or straight up rent controlled rent, and then one by one the kids grow up and move out, and then maybe one of the spouses dies, and now we have a person living in this house who, in the absence of rent stabilization, would probably be on the market for a smaller place that rents for less than this rent stabilized location. But because it's rent stabilized, this inefficiently allocates the housing where they would downsize. And you might ask, well, Jared, where are they supposed to go? And therein lies Maria's excellent point about land use restrictions keeping us from building the variety of housing our community needs.
Thank you. Maria, same question to you about what do people do when rent is so high in the area, especially with the shortage of housing?
Yeah, short answer, people leave. There's a lot of people who have been displaced, right? And I am not sure if you all remember 2017 when there was that La Conchita, there was another kind of earth sliding, mudslide, and the freeway was actually blocked. There was this big workforce from Ventura County who actually went to Santa Barbara who couldn't get there. When we have communities where only the people who can pay the most are able to afford housing, we have weak communities. We don't have stable economic communities. We need diversity in our communities so that we could be stable. And when we talk about, and I will bring up Jared's point of zoning, yeah, that is the biggest issue. So if you take anything away from this, is that we both agree that zoning is the biggest issue here. But what you just said about rent control is the same argument you can make about Prop 13. And the people, yeah. so we're talking about, trying to keep communities together, right? There is a value in that. When you keep someone in their own family, when you keep a child inside a stable home where they know they're not gonna move every year or every 2 years, that is stable. That is a community, and that's something that we need to value as a society.
Thank you. And you're up first, Maria, on this next question. So Prop 33 was brought to the ballot by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and they are the most prominent funder, about $34 million. They've contributed to this. Those that are against it include the apartment associations, California Realtors, National Realtors. Last time I checked, they've spent about $111 million. But Maria, to this point, tell us why it makes sense to support a single organization's ballot measure for this. Isn't there something that maybe this should have been handled by the legislature? Share with us your views about AIDS Healthcare Foundation.
That is true. I have no knowledge of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation other than they've done this twice before. This is the third time they're doing it. And, we're supporting them in the sense that, hey, they have provided the funds. They're trying to push this through. And in general, tenant rights advocacy groups, statewide, acknowledge the need to change Costa-Hawkins and repeal Costa-Hawkins. Again, we're talking about stable communities. We're talking about rent stabilization as being part of the 3 Ps of housing: protection, preservation, and production. We need all 3 of them. Production, that is what's been talked about mostly at state level, right? We have protections, which is what this is. This is a protection for communities, low-income communities, the people who pick your guys' food, literally. And so we need those 2 prongs. When we talk about preservation, that's the 3rd prong, okay? Preservation, we also need to get into, and that's something that we don't talk about enough here. So although I don't know much about the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, I do know that these 3 issues have to be tackled. And production could look like changing zoning laws. Preservation could look like community land trusts, right? And really trying to preserve housing into community hands.
Jared, let's hear your thoughts about this being brought forward by a single funder, AIDS Healthcare Foundation.
So, David, I think that's orthogonal to the issue. right? If you will, and I don't mean to be, that is an ad hominem. We can judge the merits of repealing Costa-Hawkins irrespective of who brought it up, right? I think it is unusual that they do this. I don't want to pick on them one way or another. I want to pick on their idea because it's a bad idea, right? Again, Maria and I think there should be more housing. But in places that have rent control, where we've studied this, and we sometimes use the word this is academic, remember that just means that someone who was on a college payroll studied this, not that it is some ivory tower crazy idea. People sat down with data about communities and tried to measure the effects of rent control on various aspects of the housing market. Rent control lowered the quality of the housing stock and reduced new construction as builders rightfully anticipated that the rewards to their activities would be lowered by virtue of the ability to use rent control. So I don't care if the AIDS Foundation backed this. I don't care if Homelander from The Boys backed this. I don't care if 2 of my former students who were in the room backed this. Would I care? Well, I would care about that because that would show that I had not taught them properly. But other than that, I care about it because it is a bad idea and it will hurt the people that Maria and I agree we should try to help. That's why I think it's a bad idea.
Jared, you keep the microphone. So,
yes, sir.
In a larger sense, it's not necessarily Prop 33, but the question is, should there be incentives so people could provide ADUs in maybe tiny homes? How does that fit in with your view of housing stock?
So are you saying there should be, to clarify, for subsidies or other things for increasing housing supply?
What kind of incentives can be provided for ADUs in tiny home communities?
I have nothing against it. I probably take a more limited role of government spending than most people in California. But I think that before we talked about spending taxpayers' money on things, we could talk about stopping people from spending their own money on things. I own a home in California. I have a front yard that I never use, and I tried to turn it into an ADU. And what I found out from the city was that the largest one I could build was 160 square feet because I was not allowed to extend the ADU beyond the front of my existing house unless I attached it to my house, which I was not terribly interested in doing. The reason for that regulation is specifically to make it less attractive to homeowners to build things like ADUs. That is a significant abrogation of property rights to me. And it not only limited my benefits from my property, it limited someone else's benefits from my property. There is someone who would have been perfectly happy to be my tenant and front neighbor, and now they're not going to be, and I continue to have an ugly front yard. So before I incentivize things with money, I'd get out of the way of the people who are willing to put up housing in the first place.
Look for Jared to put a ballot proposition in 2 years to build his ADU.
Please, and I would totally support that ballot proposition because we do need to change those zoning laws, which are the ones that are keeping people like Jared from building houses in their front yards. I also think financing options, right? I think ADUs are a great idea. It just needs more financing options. I've seen people try to go around this whole getting an architecture firm, the people who go and do the construction and actually get quotes that are $155,000 to build an ADU. That's just not reasonable. And so when we talk about real actual financing options, that's really the job, I think, of either financing agencies or governments who could see whether they have an opportunity to be able to actually provide those options to people. So I would agree. I honestly, more housing, the best. I also agree that tiny homes would be good as well. The thing with tiny homes is that they kind of operate kind of like a mobile home park community, right? So it's kind of certainly the same thing, but yes, the more housing, the better. The more flexibility there is to build housing, the better in general.
Thank you. And rebuttal?
This is not a rebuttal per se, because on this I think we're fairly well aligned. But speaking to the financing thing, as long as we're talking about things that people could do to help with housing supply, it's not just about the regulations on frontage and so forth. Most cities choose to adopt regulations that make you build your granny flat or ADU in the style of the neighborhood or in the style of your house. One of the things that does is limit the use of pre-manufactured housing, which dramatically lowers the cost. I had a very fancy option that I had to forego, not only for the size, but also for the style. It would have cut my financing burden rather significantly.
No. I mean, same. I think in general, when we have manufactured homes, there is a program in LA that you all might want to be interested in checking out. They do have, I believe LA County or LA City, I'm not necessarily sure. They do have some financing options with some modular housing as well for ADUs. And you know, if we could replicate that here in Ventura County, that'd be great.
Okay, Maria, you're up first. This may actually be a quick question, and actually I should give you credit, Maria. One of the questions was how long has Costa-Hawkins been in force, and you answered that already, 1995, so good for you anticipating questions. Maria, if you're able to, what is the relationship between Prop 33 and 34? It seems like it's a group that's anti-AIDS Healthcare Foundation trying to take money away from them. Are you able to answer that?
I don't know, so I shall give it to Jared.
So this is less a debate and just a public service announcement. There is a group of individuals who are particularly annoyed at the AIDS Foundation, and so they have designed a proposition that would make that foundation, which makes a good bit of its revenues from the particular healthcare providing activities, that any savings they got from lower drug prices, that they would have to plow them back into patient care, which would limit their ability to use them things on like this, like ballot resolutions. And so this is a, if you will, this is payback. I have not looked into the specifics of what the AIDS Foundation does with its money. I wish it didn't do this, obviously. But this strikes me as being incredibly poorly spirited.
Okay, thank you. Jared, you're up first on this next one. So there's this, I guess, philosophical question. Why are voters asked to decide this instead of the legislature? It seems like a very important law like this should be going through the committee process, stakeholders are involved, but here we are, and it's happened before with various initiatives. Why are we even deciding this one?
So David, this is not a debate question, and again, more of like an informational question, but it's a good one. This actually goes back to our original experience with the railroad industry in the late 1800s. California has one of the least restrictive ballot access measures in the country. This is why so much of our law is settled directly by the voters rather than indirectly by proportional representation. You can go Google it in the Ventura County Star. One of my political science colleagues and I have advocated strongly to abolish this system and have dramatically more action taken care of by Sacramento. I'm not saying that I think legislators are always better than my personal views, but I do think on average they are better informed than most of us are on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November in even numbered years. I don't mean to malign any of you. I'm just saying if I had to bet money, the members of the committee that handles housing in the Assembly and the Senate probably know a little bit more about the ins and outs of this than we do, even collectively, if we got to use our phones. That's all.
Okay. And Maria, would you like to share with us your thoughts about why the legislature is not doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jared. I think the system is broken in some degree. I honestly, how many people have heard of the No on 33 campaign and have heard ads on it actively? Cool, most of you. How many people have heard Yes on 33? Like 2% of that, yeah. So reason being, well, the people who have the most money can pay for the most advertisement, and they will message themselves as, I mean, the No on 33 campaign, in my opinion, I don't know about you all, has taken up a very pro-tenant stance, which we as tenant advocates are totally against. We believe actually Costa-Hawkins is the most tenant protective stance. So when we talk about why Sacramento doesn't make these changes, that goes into the political realm, right? And that goes into how much money goes into our ballot system and why it's easier sometimes for these large interests to push through their initiatives, through the ballot initiatives and through our voting system rather than the state legislature, because they know it's not going to be as popular if they push it through the state legislature. So, you know, in this case, it is a pro measure for Prop 33. The AIDS Foundation brought it up, but I think there's like many measures on the ballot where if you look at who's actually paying for them, it's like multi-million-dollar corporations or groups, right? So who has the money speaks the loudest.
And we'll start with you again, Maria. And I have to say, you two are probably the friendliest opponents I've ever done in a debate. But that's good. We're all learning something, so thank you both for that. So this is also sort of a philosophical thing. So Maria, it's a little long here, but what are some alternatives, approaches, and this will be for both of you, to achieving affordable housing without necessarily implementing rent control or drastically increasing construction? You know, the community here in Ventura County, I think for many years, values its open spaces, and it doesn't want to be another Los Angeles. We've heard that time and time again. So do you see a way, Maria, where it's possible to strike a balance where we could have lower rents, a little more housing, sort of have our cake and eat it too?
Yeah, I think SOAR. So how many people know about SOAR? Yes, I am a pro-SOAR person. I don't think we should be expanding or sprawling anytime soon. I do believe, however, that our core economic and, you know, in general, our core economic and housing initiatives should be done in the center of cities, on Main Street, on like actual places where there has been businesses. There have been businesses since the early 1900s, before the automobile was built. So I do believe there are different incentives that we could do, including ADUs. We need to relax our zoning laws. Right now, 90% of our cities are zoned for single-family homes. We need more development, more multi-housing development. I know people don't like density, but we need it. And it doesn't have to be ugly box things that we built, right? It could be, hey, let's make it easier for a senior citizen who may be living in a large house to turn it into a duplex, or to create an opportunity for them to have an ADU or junior ADU. We need those types of incentives to create a community that is balanced. It looks pretty, and it doesn't really affect us as much as sprawl does, because sprawl is also environmentally really, really dangerous for us.
Jared, I can't wait to hear you take the opposite side of this argument.
This is deeply unfair. The first time I met David Marin, it was because he invited me to a debate on SOAR where I was taking the position of voting no on both SOAR and SOAR Prime in 2016. So let me make this crystal clear. You cannot be for restrictions on land use and for affordable housing. You can say that you can be for that, but that's like saying, I feel like squeezing this side of the balloon and I don't want this side to pop out. That's not how it works. They are directly contradictory to each other. Let me make this crystal clear to you. I am holding right here the non-coastal zoning districts, the number of acres in the unincorporated regions of Ventura County and their zoning rules. 785,821.2 acres are zoned open space. 204,219.2 acres are zoned agricultural exclusive. 12.5 acres are zoned residential high density. 12.5. Now, if each of the individual cities in our county had not also restricted development, maybe this wouldn't be such a big deal, and we would have upbuilding within our cities. But instead, 2 years after SOAR was passed, that's exactly what they did. I don't mind that you want those things. Recognize that they contradict each other.
Thank you, Jared. We'll start with you on the next one. So, Jared, why do you think that there are all these incentives that impose restrictions on building regulations and suppress the supply? You both have talked about the problems with it. Why is it that the cities and the county have put them in place?
So this really bums me out. There's a political scientist at, I want to say UC Merced, Jessica Traustine. I think I'm saying her last name right. And she wrote a really great paper where she surveyed about 1,500 people nationally, and she gave them the opportunity, it's called a contingent valuation study. She kept varying different kinds of development. And so single family homes versus townhomes, and single family homes versus apartments, and so on, with different rental characteristics and mortgage prices and square footage and number of people. And what she found was, for any comparison you did, a majority of people preferred anything to multifamily development. And it turns out that the reason why is they believe, contrary to empirical evidence, that it's positively correlated with what I will call all bad things in the world. Now I will add something to that. There's a footnote in the paper where she said, originally I was going to always leave the option of neither of these developments, but when I did a pilot study with 250 people, that option was chosen so frequently that I decided to exclude it to get at the other possibilities. Right. People have decided to freeze their communities in amber. Several people in this room and online tonight are old enough to remember Jurassic Park. Remember what happened to the mosquito once it was frozen in amber? It died.
Nice way to wrap up, right on time. Thank you. So, Maria, what are your thoughts about why we have these restrictions, whatever the incentives are, that are impacting our housing supply?
Yeah, I honestly correlated with the automobile. So when we created cars, we decided to sprawl out, which was back then a great idea. However, once we have seen 2 generations or 3 generations of this cycle, we have seen that it's just really, really bad for our community. Like, think about it. We need to create power lines that go all the way to these sprawled out places. We have to create roads. We have to create gas, pipes that goes under it, and all the infrastructure that goes with sprawl. Now, I know that I'm not gonna get super into it, but if y'all are interested, please check out Strong Towns. It's from a guy from, I believe, Minnesota, created this nonprofit called Strong Towns. He actually has created this, basically following in a way, of people who understand that the economic centers of cities are actually in their downtown and their main streets. We can't get away from that, because if you look at development everywhere else in the world, you'll see that the United States, Australia, and Canada are outliers. We have cities that are unnatural. We have cities that sprawl way too much and take up too much space for the density that we need to have. I honestly believe that density needs to be created and we need to support it. And yes, that does mean, change. And I think we have to embrace it to get out of this housing crisis.
And I do have to do another fact check about what Jared said. Jurassic Park was not a true story. Unless there's more questions, I'm going to start wrapping up. But I just try to take everything we've heard tonight. And Jared, I think you're up first. Did you, one of you
No, I
want to?
forgot to turn it once I picked up the microphone. Mindlessly.
It's Maria's turn.
That's right, yeah.
But, so we've heard from Jared the sense that he's against this because any kind of restraint limits housing. It's going to be counterproductive. We've heard from Maria that rents are too high, people are getting forced out of their homes, and it's very expensive to live here. I'm not sure that both of those are incorrect. In many ways, they're both right, if you want to look at it that way. But where is the importance? So for you, Maria, regardless of the restrictions that new rental laws would put in, you're for this regardless. Please explain why.
I honestly don't believe that rent control will be the biggest driver for the any supply shortage. I truly, truly believe that it is zoning laws, it is the way that the market operates that creates this market that's inflated for rentals. When we talk about vacancy control and we talk about how it would actually look like in our cities, I truly believe that Ventura County, again, we're not the testing ground, folks. LA and San Francisco are. They're going to be the first ones to test this out and figure out what works and what doesn't. But I do believe two things. First, we need more empirical data. We need people to actually figure out what's going on with their rental housing, because even though there are studies out there, there is no real registry. There's no real way to understand how the rental market works. And secondly, I do think that there's something to be said about social capital and the way that our society works. We can't just be going with the same system for 30 years and think it somehow works. It does not. It clearly doesn't. And so when you're faced with this evidence, yes, we need more production, but we also need protection for our communities. And think about those who are not Spanish speakers, who are people who are really doing the work that we don't do. So please think about them.
So Jared, what about that point about, yes, there's the regulations you don't want to see, but what about protecting people? What about seeing people who are going to lose their homes, maybe become homeless because of rents? How do you square that circle?
Well, so David, so Maria raised a really interesting point there. What she said, and I'm going to paraphrase you because I don't write that quickly, is that separate from the supply shortage, right, there are people who need protection. But remember what that protection will actually do. We have measured this already in other cities. What it will do is lower the quality of the housing stock and over time reduce the availability of rental housing. Assume for the moment that we're not going to get our way, me and Maria, and so we are not going to actually significantly expand housing supply, which is the one true way of making housing more affordable. Then all we're going to do when we add rent control is temporarily benefit a small number of renters and in the long term harm a larger number of renters. So we are strictly worse off from that combination of existing supply constraints and price controls. So to me, this is right, it is, David, I guess the way I'd say it is orthogonal. It is deeply unfortunate that there are a group of people who, because we have restricted supply, prices are higher than they can afford to continue to be in their communities. But the solution, as it were, of simply mandating that their prices be lower and that be a permanent facet of the market only makes the problem worse. That's why I'm opposed to it.
Go ahead, 30 seconds.
And I would like to point out that, I'm curious, Jared, about the studies that you're pointing out. I'm guessing a lot of them have to do with conditions of the rental market being a lot less than optimal, I guess, like in terms of, repairs. Is that what you mean?
I mean, the literal condition of the housing stock deteriorates, yes. And then the other one is, to go back to your thing, is literally units come off the market because the only way to claim the full value is to sell it rather than rent it. Continue.
Right, and so that means that with Costa-Hawkins, right, there's this exception called the M.L.S. Act. The M.L.S. Act allows people to then take their units, the rental units, off of the rental market and into home ownership, right, convert them into condos. That is what we consider a loophole into this law. So what proponents of Proposition 33 are trying to do is create Costa-Hawkins, but also limit that loophole, which is really why we need more data in general.
About the housing market.
Okay, well, we have more questions, and to that point.
Wait, do you mind if I jump back in on this?
Oh.
This is actually valid. So she keeps mentioning the more data part. To be clear, first of all, we have over 120 studies on this. This isn't like something that we need to know. Dick Thaler, he got the 2008 Nobel Prize for Behavioral Economics. When there was a survey of high-ranking economists on this issue, the issue of will price controls reduce the affordability and availability of rental housing to communities in need, what he said, and I quote, is, "Does the earth revolve around the sun? Next." That was the extent to which he thought it was worthy of commentary. This is a well-established empirical fact. In fact, it's well-established here in California because people did a really high-quality study just in 2022 using the data from San Francisco. And I appreciate, right, If you close that loophole that you're describing, it makes it sound like that solves the problem. What that does is exacerbate the quality decline without taking the units to, right? The least bad option is that they get converted from rental to ownership. The worst situation is they're simply left there because, again, as a landlord, your incentive is based on what you bring in as rent. So you have every incentive to then allow the quality of the house to match the price you can get for it, rather than maintain the quality to match the price that you can earn from it. And here I can tell Maria wants it back, so I'm giving it to her.
Yes, go ahead, Maria.
Sorry, and I do want to say, that's just not how it works. I have seen, no, it's not how it works. There is I know, and I appreciate that there are studies about this. In real life experience, the units that have been in Oxnard, for example, that's where I work, right? Go to South Oxnard. I will take every single one of you in a tour to South Oxnard properties. They were not rent controlled. They have not been maintained. Can somebody tell me why? If they have not been rent controlled, they yet have not been maintained. That is a industry practice rather than a failure of rent control policy.
Do you want to respond, Jerry?
Yeah. That, Maria, I thought you were a political science major. You've forgotten about the counterfactual, right? That we can look at some housing and go, this got worse, does not tell us what the relevant effect of rent control on housing is. We are here in your Amgen. The way that they test drugs is with a treatment group and a control group. What we need to have is what's the relevant counterfactual? What would the housing look like in the absence versus the presence of rent control? She's telling us some unrent controlled housing got worse. We don't know what the same housing looks like in the absence of rent control. That's what studies like the ones I'm talking about try to do, and that's what they find.
Do you want to answer, though, her question about why did those particular apartments and that housing stock get less?
I wouldn't have the foggiest.
Okay, just want to give you the opportunity. Jared, I'm going to stay with you, though. We'll do another question here. So it's sort of combining two. One is sort of in the spirit of bipartisanship. Can you each try to take the other's position or answer for them? I won't put you on the spot, but in this next question, I think you have that opportunity. So, Jared, as a believer in data, is there proof that rent control works in some places? Santa Monica, San Francisco. You're saying it doesn't work, but have there been situations where rent control does work?
So, if we define work in the narrow sense of the units on which we put rent control have lower rents, then it works 100% of the time. As long as that's the only thing you care about, congratulations, you will have been successful. That is not, however, the relevant question to ask. So the thing that I constantly try to think about is, right, so Marie brought up a really good point, like, oh, well, the reason they could do this is because they were allowed to sell that, and what if they can't? Well, then I expect the quality to degrade. Well, what if they can do, right, you can imagine a series of controls that you could put in. Sweden has some pretty tight controls on that for rental housing. And if you go and Google, what you'll find out is that you have to wait about 9 years for a rent-controlled apartment in Stockholm. Why? Because one of the natural effects that I teach in Principles of Macro, which Maria's brother took with me way back in the day, is that a price ceiling will naturally lead to queuing. The least bad outcome that you get from rent control is a black market, because at least then buyers are finding sellers, which is to put this in language that I think Maria and I agree on, families who need housing are finding housing. The bad news is when you do things under the table like that, you have considerably less protections. And I suspect if I ask, you've probably had some experience with those people before too, right? People who've basically gotten screwed because they had informal arrangements. I'm gonna hand it over.
And so to Maria, we'll wrap up with you on the same question. Are there examples where rent control does work?
Yeah, the examples for rent control works. Okay. 541 Costa del Mar apartments right now, and terrace apartments 465 52 terrace apartments. They're both Oxnard rent stabilized apartments. They both got an above 4% rent increase. They're now fighting it so it could be lower than the 4%. What does this mean to the families? That means that they could bring more food to the table. That means they don't have to bring in random people to live with them. That means that their children are able to stay in their room and not live with, stay in the same room as their parents because they try to get a sub-renter to be able to live in their house to make rent payments. That's what that means. Again, I appreciate the economic theory. I just don't think that's how it rolls out in real life. That's just not how it rolls out. We have, for 20 years, we were talking about minimum wage as if this was, this thing that was horrible, and then we found out that it wasn't that horrible, right? I think rent control is on the same boat. We're thinking about the effects of rent control in this general abstract area. Again, I want to bring it back to that family who is struggling now, paying $2,800 for a 2-bedroom apartment. They're getting their rent increase $400. Well, I had the Vines apartment in Oxnard. They had a rent increase of $600 overnight. How is that fair? It's just not.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to go ahead and start with our closing statements. We're going to go in the reverse order. Jared, when you're ready, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for those of you who are watching tonight and also watching when this is recorded where they bleep out all the things I said inappropriately. Thank you to Maria for playing along with me tonight. So I've been thinking about this. I don't think that Maria and I disagree that there are people who are hurt by high rents. The question is, what is the most appropriate policy or set of policies to deal with that? I am telling you, this is a consensus view of the people who study this, both theoretically and more importantly, as Maria has emphasized, empirically. If you want something to be affordable and widely available, you want the supply to increase. And before we talk, whoever asked that very nice question about what incentives, before we talk about incentives, let's just talk about removing the disincentives. And the biggest one of those is preventing people from using land that is being inefficiently allocated to other uses by law to allow it to go to its highest use, much of which will end up as housing. If, however, we are not going to do that, which so far we have voted against doing so, adding rent control on top of that will increase waits, lower quality, reduce supply, and ultimately exacerbate the problem it is trying to resolve. It is like trying to put out a fire with propane. Let's not do that.
Thank you. And Maria, your turn for closing statement.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you again for everyone here. Thank you again for the Colleges of Law and Moorpark College for this debate. I would like to again, just say that rent stabilization, rent control, it is made out to be this policy that is supposed to create affordable housing. That's not what the policy does. The policy is to preserve people in their neighborhoods, in their communities. Again, we could talk about the damages that it has, or it apparently has, in the rental market. I honestly believe most of that damage comes from zoning laws, and we both agree on that. Rents and renters, they are a backbone of our society. 44% of people here in Ventura County are renters. That's a lot of people a lot of people that are holding down the positions and the work that we need to be stable in this community. Those are the people that go to work every day at 4:30 in the morning to pick our strawberries, to pick our celery, to pick our arugula for our salads. We need these people to stay here. We can't just have them move on somewhere further out in search of this idea of supply of housing. We have to we have to keep them safe here in their communities. And I truly do believe that, and I believe that rent stabilization is a great tool for that.
Thank you. How about a round of applause for As a stay seated. We're going to bring Dr. Niemer up back in a moment to do the other poll. And do I need to request security to keep you two separated afterwards? You guys going to be okay? Okay.
No, I'm married.
All right. Okay. Thank you all. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Niemer, and we have the new poll question up there.
A round of applause for David Marin, our moderator. And a round of applause for all of you for being with us today. We had a lot to do. The baseball line, everything. Thank you for joining us. So the poll should be live. It is live because I see the responses coming in. So we polled you at the beginning of tonight's program, and interesting results. I'm going to reveal those now. So we had 3 options at the first poll. The option for the first poll was I support or lean toward Prop 33. Only 20% said that. The second one is I do not support or lean towards was only 10%, which means 70% of you who are playing along, those as well at home, said undecided, or they had an open mind. So
Lies.
they had an open mind. So what we've done is we've taken away that undecided, and I'm going to give you another 10 seconds. You at home as well, another 10 seconds. I'm going to deactivate the poll, and I'm going to reveal our movement. And here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deactivate. And here it is. I support or lean toward supporting Prop 33. 53% of you remarked on that. And then I do not support or lean toward opposing Prop 33. 47%. So if you do the math on this, the most movement, 10% to 47% was 37% movement. 20% to 53% was 33% movement.
Versus 37. Yeah, but that's not statistically significant.
Well,
I mean, look at that.
we had the most movement from the before and after. Thank you again to our panelists and all of you at home. And that completes the date night. Thank you and have a good evening.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.